Are DAOs DOA? Betteridge's law aside, DAOs have been around for nearly as long as you could code on the blockchain, which, I guess, hasn't been that long. In fact, one just called the DAO and its associated hack was one of the defining events of early crypto. DAOs are decentralized organizations that you participate in by voting with a governance token that you own and stake. But this is crypto and everything's an asset. That includes not just your token, but also your vote. So, what if you sold it? In this episode, we explore the consequences of the vote delegation market, where voting power in DAO governance is bought and sold. Board positions, community fund disbursements, updates, all for sale. But what's the price? A wise man once said, "Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." It's not always quite that simple, but crypto sure gets close. This is Not Your Crypto Podcast. Hello and welcome back to Not Your Crypto Podcast with myself, Justin, and Michael. I
Ooh,
forgot my own name. Wow. Have
I think you did that before too, actually.
I done that before? Have I called
I
myself
think so.
you, Justin? Amazing. If you're signing back in, we appreciate that. This is episode 25. Today, we're not going to do what have you been reading or anything. We're going to jump straight into one and a half topics, because we want to do a quick continuation or / update of our last podcast. We were talking about Monero and 51% attacks in our last episode. We kind of concluded a bunch of things as though it had already been put to bed, but it hasn't, has it, Michael? It's still going on as of today is, I think, the 19th of September. We're recording on the 19th. It is still going on, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, stuff keeps happening. I don't know. This is why I like talking about stuff from years ago sometimes
Yes,
because
I think I agree.
nothing new is happening. But yeah, I mean, the story continues in that I think a few different reorgs, like chain reorgs, have happened of different lengths and of longer lengths than the one that we covered. I think it was like 6 in the
yeah, it was
episode
6.
that we talked about. There's been ones that have been longer since then. I think up into the double digits, right, of blocks. And so how does that affect what we said? Does it affect what we said? Does it change the opinion of, particularly of their percentage of the hash rate of the network, how much they have? Presumably the longer the reorg, the more hash power it takes to, hit that sequence of blocks where you can do the reorg, and then it means you have more hash rate, you're closer to 50%, maybe over 50%, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think we concluded that it wasn't a 51% attack, but it was alarming. It was kind of a classic security professional hedged response. And I think it is alarming that yeah, you're right. Double digits, last I saw was 18 block reorg. Again, to even have a 2 or 3 block reorg is slightly concerning. To get 6, prove they did something. 18, okay, now we're getting into the danger zone, so to speak. And so, yeah, I think I haven't checked the details of this one. Again, they're probably doing it through selfish mining, but it's going to be, to my mind, from my understanding of how this technically is executed, a demonstration of the fact that they have accrued a lot of hash rate and continue to do it. This is all being carried out by the same actor as well, which we labeled as grey hat because they did warn them and they are trying to do it from a learning perspective, but also they are genuinely attacking a live production network. So yeah, 18 block reorg in Monero, the story continues, the saga continues, as they say. I think the lesson for us as podcasters and people who are interested in this stuff, we're going to wait for our hacks to be a year old from now on. That way we don't have to come back and drive back into our notes. But yes, so that's just a quick update. But this week, we're going to be talking about something completely different. We're going to be talking about decentralized autonomous organizations. That is a hell of a mouthful. I think we have covered them slightly in a previous podcast. I can't remember what that episode was called. I'll look it up at some point and maybe put it in the show notes. But yes, this will be our second time doing a deeper dive. This time it isn't so much as a what are they about, more of a this is what has been happening in the time. Some interesting things. So what is a DAO? A best way for me to understand it and for me to be able to explain it or articulate it, I think, is saying that they are a codified governance structure that uses decentralized technology, blockchain technology, decentralized and distributed in this case, to enforce a trustless layer again, so you don't need to trust who's a part of it. You can just trust what they do. And that it's done with integrity, so to speak, on the chain. It's recorded to basically make decisions on things, to make decisions on entities. So in this case, it could be a I don't know, a platform of some sort. It would be, okay, we've got, for example, this is me just making up an example. We've got Justin chain, and we want to make a decision about how we're going to upgrade that chain, what we're going to do. You can basically codify what the governance structure would look like and the governance rules around that. And then you have people who vote whether they want that thing to happen or not. Obviously, there are a lot more details to the rules around this, but that's kind of a quick smash and grab overview of what a DAO is. I should say, if you want no more details, please go back to our previous episode where we do discuss this in further depth. But yeah, so Michael, this is an interesting story because what a DAO allows you to do is basically vote on these proposals. But then you start to realize pretty quickly that all the humans are used to voting. If you live in a democracy, you're used to voting. There are different types of democracies, but most of them are kind of very similar in the Western world where you and I are from. So you look at a DAO and you say, okay, so we've codified democracies now. How's that going to work, and how does that solve problems? Or is it not going to bump into the problems that we see in real life democracies? What do you think of how DAO works, and what do you think what problems do you see it solving, and what problems do you think it's naively brought upon itself with the fact that they're trying to replicate real life governance structures in a decentralized way?
Yeah, that's a big question, I guess. I think so. A DAO, like, you can look at it kind of very simply, I think, and say, a DAO is a set of smart contracts, and then a group of people that have the ability, usually through the tokens that they hold, to take actions on those smart contracts. Those actions are usually like voting on a proposal or proposing a proposal. Mostly it boils down to voting, I think, right? There's probably alternate models that are not quite as like heavily kind of voting based, but that seems like the main thing that a lot of them do. And then, you're voting on stuff like what functions the smart contract carries out. A lot of times there's like a community fund. There's like a wallet that the smart contracts own or control, or a set of wallets. Those wallets have money that's meant to help grow the ecosystem of, whatever protocol. And the DAO like votes on how to delegate that money, how to distribute it, that sort of thing, to like support the community, right? And the idea is, well, I'm a token holder of this, I'm invested, I have like ownership and a stake or an interest in it, and I'm going to vote to grow the community around me. So yeah, it's like protocol governance, dispersing community funds, sometimes like electing positions within an organization, within the organization, I guess. And those positions, I don't know, I assume are also smart contract governed and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think when I think about it logically, I think this is a logical outcome when you spin up a decentralized network and you have people who are engaged, but nothing's static, obviously, in the world of tech. Developments need to happen, problems can arise, and there are different ways to solve different problems. And so you're going to want to know which way the community is happy with going, because all of them have trade-offs and so forth, and pros and cons. So it's kind of logical that you would have an organization that spins up around this. It's obviously also a logical outgrowth from different from open source. There's that comparison again, in that obviously it kind of all happens in the comments, right? Where people are just arguing back and forth, and then you can either suck it and see, because you either like the way the code, the repo owner, you either like the direction the repo owner is going to go in, or you don't, and that's just kind of, that's all you've got. Whereas here, you actually get to have a voice. I mean, governance is an interesting thing because that is the softest side of tech. It's where literally the rubber meets the road, in terms of you are now integrating policies that are going to be codified, so to speak, but you've also got the human aspect to it because the tech is there to support the people. So you're now codifying decisions, and that's harder to reverse than just words on paper. Like when we codify laws, you can reverse laws, etc., etc. Whereas if you're a platform and you're things are supposed to be built on top of you, you making changes is not so easy, because you're now going to affect, you can have second, third order downstream effects. So I think DAO's existence is a logical expectation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there be dragons when you look at any type of governance structure, because people are people. Again, so yeah, so it now comes down to, I think, something like you raised earlier about incentives, right? And I think that's where we're going to see, in this particular case, interesting things happen, as we're starting to see a lot in the decentralized world now. Is people are realizing the code can be great, but if the incentives are misaligned, then you get some interesting outcomes. So yeah, do you want to jump into what happened here, or do you want to talk about the
Yeah.
governance structure? Which way do you want to skin this?
Well, let's go into what happened, I guess. I think that's what we have up next, that we can talk about the
Yeah.
governance side of it. So yeah, so the specific event that like prompted us to start talking about this is a little bit older. at least a few months. It's
Yeah.
not quite as recent. So it was, I think, April of 2025, so like spring of this year. So there was a vote on the in the DAO that is part of Arbitrum. Do I say that? Arbitrum, right? Is how you
Arbitrum,
say
yeah.
that. A lot of these words, you never say out loud. You only read them on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
To elect members of a committee on the DAO, three members of the committee, the oversight and transparency committee.
Correct.
And during that vote, someone, I think it is known specifically who, in terms of the wallet address and all that, but
Yeah.
we'll just say an actor paid a sum of money to this DeFi organization that we're going to kind of go into a bit more depth on, to basically like rent or borrow voting power, and then directed those votes to attempt to get a member, a different person, elected as a member of the committee of the DAO. And the interesting bit of this to me is the asymmetric value here. So like in terms of the numbers, the actor paid about $10,000 at the time, like 10,000 USD at the time in ETH, to rent over $6 million US dollars worth of voting power. So that's like very asymmetrical, right? I don't know what the percentage is, but like the leverage there is like very large.
It's crazy.
And they directed those, to try to elect this person. I think you looked into it, and the person actually did not quite get elected. It was like they were selecting 3 people, and they were the 4th most.
Yeah, basically.
So I think they did not end up on the committee, but
and
this was... Go ahead.
Sorry. A couple of interesting points here. These 3 roles are paid roles. The salary was $7.5K a month. So there is an incentive there to get on the board. Obviously, you want to do. Now, basically, everyone put out their own, sorry, I'm British, so I'm going to say MPs, but I'm assuming congressional representatives in the States, and you're Canadian, so you say MPs as well. Everyone sets out their proposal. In the proposal, they basically set out their stall, almost their manifesto, saying some of them said, I will not take the salary because I don't need it, etc., etc., for various reasons. But number 1, it was a paid role. Number 2, there was meant to be 3 members elected to this board, and basically this particular one didn't make it. And number 4.4 as well, or was that 0.3? Either way, they are claiming they did not ask for these votes. This was done by another actor that was
the
not
person
there.
that the votes were directed to has said that they did not ask for. They were not the one who purchased it. They did not ask for somebody else to purchase it.
Yeah,
it just kind of happened.
So then, obviously, that kind of flared up within the community. I just wanted to give the readers, the listeners, more context so that they were aware of why this is very interesting. $7.5K a month is not bad work, by the way. I just want to say, not bad work at all for being on the transparent and oversight committee of a chain. Anyway,
and with all this stuff, like there's other benefits, like obviously the specific situation, the person may not have been involved in the votes or whatever, but in a hypothetical situation where somebody is maybe purchasing it for themselves or purchasing it for someone whose interests are aligned with them, presumably there's lots of other benefits to somebody, in an oversight committee being allied with you. This is not a new problem in governance, right? This is like conflict of interest
This is, I mean,
is
yeah,
the word.
this has conflict of interest written all over it, because if anyone's allowed to purchase votes, if you're allowed to invest 10k worth of 10k to get 6.5 million votes, then get a role that pays you 7.5k a month, I think it's quite obvious what you're going to do. And again, this is why I like your point about incentives, because we're going to come back to that a lot.
Yeah,
Because,
and I think there's like other comparisons in calling back on previous episodes I think will be interesting. But for now, okay, so like we haven't named the specific platforms that are involved. So the platform that mediated this vote renting or kind of delegation purchasing is called Lobbyfy, which is something I didn't know existed until I read about the situation or whatever. And yeah, basically the idea of Lobbyfy is like, I am I'm a token holder of the token for some DAO, but maybe I don't want to be voting the idea is I want to capitalize on my voting power within the DAO. So usually, like if I have voting power in a DAO, I'm either going to directly vote myself, right? I'm going to use my voting power myself because I care about the resolutions that are coming up and I think I have an opinion on them, whatever. Or I'm going to like delegate my vote to somebody else. So this is like pretty much every protocol allows this. I have votes. I'm going to delegate it to somebody else. There's organizations that will kind of take your delegation and then vote according to their mission or according to their interests. There's some like
a bit like representational democracy, really and truly, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of things. It sounds like representational democracy. There's a lot of like corporate governance parallels to this as well, which we'll talk about, I think, in a bit. But yeah. Like I delegate my vote to somebody else who is acting presumably in some interest that I share with them. I could also not vote, right? I could also just not vote. My vote just kind of gets not counted.
Not counted. Yeah.
And I think okay. So what Lobbyfy does is it allows me to like delegate to them, like stake my delegation with them. And then instead of them having like some, mission or platform or like position with how they'll vote, oh, we vote in the interest of the ecosystem according to these principles or whatever, they actually just kind of sell it. So they create a market where somebody can come in, oh, hey, we have, X amount of this token in this DAO staked with us. We're going to sell it to you for this amount, and then you can decide how it votes. So I think there's like two mechanisms. Either you can like just outright purchase the voting power and then direct it how to vote if I'm, using the Lobbyfy platform. Or there's also like an auction mechanism where the votes are kind of like up for auction, and then different parties can bid on which way they want the vote to go.
Nay, and the one with the largest amount of votes basically wins. So in some ways, it's a sub vote of the vote, and this is a very interesting thing here. So yeah, I just want to kind of pause you there, because again, it's about misaligned incentives. So I kind of raised the point about the salary and obviously the conflict of interest in that you can pay to get more votes and sway the vote. But then there's also this whole thing of, okay, we're going to have an auction or an instant buy. Forget the instant buy for a second, although that was the main star of the show here. Because the instant buy price is set, just like on eBay, by the platform, which is kind of crazy, which is why you end up with, because you can get a massive asymmetry because they pinned it to some random formula in their documentation where it's basically 1% of the total amount of votes up for sale or for rent. Why? I couldn't find that out. Maybe if you're a listener and you have more information, please ping us and let us know in the comments. But then there's obviously the auction, which is another way of doing it. But then I'm like, okay, but if you're going to loan your votes to this platform, maybe I'm working this out wrong, but basically you've got a yay nay position on a proposal where you want this platform to amass votes so you can sway it towards your interest. So instead of just participating in the vote like an equal citizen of everyone else, you're basically trying to buy a bigger voice in a vote going on. That is sketchy to me, to use the North American parlance. Like that, because you're basically effectively literally trying to buy votes. So yeah,
Mhm.
that was it's very
Yeah, you're
interesting.
purchasing voting, you're exchanging capital for voting
Voting
power
power.
in a governance protocol,
I
kind
guess
of
the
very
pushback.
directly,
I
right?
guess the pushback against that is, well, okay, just buy more tokens. Then, if you want, you would just do the same. You buy more tokens, but there are mechanisms. Again, the inherent mechanism that I think we talked about with 51% attack. If you were to start buying a stake to increase your stake rapidly, you'd push the cost of your your token up. So therefore, it makes it
Yes.
harder for
So
you
like
to.
yeah. So the interesting bit here is, okay. So well, one thing I want to say at the start of this episode is that this is like when I was reading through all this and kind of learning about this. One of the thoughts I had was that Matt Levine would be extremely proud of this. Like this is exactly the kind of thing that would take up a big chunk of his newsletter or whatever.
Huge, like
Um,
10
a-
paragraphs.
yeah, and I don't know. Maybe he knows about it. Maybe he's already talked about it. I
Yeah,
don't read
maybe
all
I'll
the
go through my
newsletters. Maybe he's
emails.
already. But so like the idea is when I have a token in a governance protocol, I actually have two things. Like if you think about it from like an economic perspective, I actually have two things.
Mm.
I have ownership of the token.
Yeah.
That's one thing, and that has a value.
Yep.
And I have the voting power that ownership gives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a second thing and a different thing.
Yep.
And it has a value as well.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things are separable. So like through the delegation mechanism, I can separate those two things. I can hold and maintain ownership of the token while the rights to use it go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the kind of structure that like leads to a capital market, basically.
Yeah.
So, and like, the further, like the insight that Lobbyify had is, well, a lot of these votes that people hold and keep the economic potential of the ownership, but the economic potential of the voting rights is kind of just like cast on the ground.
Yeah.
Either because people don't vote, or because they delegate it for zero cost.
Yeah.
So, or a more nominal cost or something, or return, or something like that. And so there's basically like an idle asset, right? Like if you think about like when Uber and Airbnb and whatever were all starting, and all the talk of sharing economy was, oh, there's all this idle capital, all these idle assets around. People's cars aren't being driven all the time. People's houses aren't being occupied all the time. And so what the sharing economy does is like capitalize those idle assets. Well, in DAOs and in this governance, there's this idle asset of the voting power because people just aren't utilizing it. And so what Lobbyify steps in and does is like capitalize that idle asset, basically. So you can stake it, you'll earn yield, and they sell it to capitalize it.
Yeah.
So like economically, that's what's going on. And economically, like the logic of markets and the logic of, capitalism is going to produce that outcome.
Exactly. And
because that's what it does if there aren't other structures that, stop it from doing that.
Exactly.
And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, whatever. That's the philosophy part.
Yeah, and that's what I want to talk about.
Happens,
no,
right?
We're not skating over that, because that is the most interesting part, right? Because this is a debate that's gone on for centuries. If you're going to optimize for the profit motive, then everything else is pushed to the wayside. But this is where it gets interesting to me, because governance is about governing actions, and those actions are undertaken by people, obviously. So you're trying to really and truly, you're just governing people, and people are unpredictable. People have different incentives, and sometimes it's not always about the profit motive. So what you have here is you have a situation where they've obviously identified a market, but these proposals are built to make people's lives better, not just to increase profit. And so now you're almost undermining the purpose of why people wanted to use the DAO, or why people like the idea of a DAO in the first place. They felt they wanted to engage in the chain. They felt they wanted to become part of a community. They want to be able to prove and token holder. And they then want to see this community grow in a certain way. That's the benefit of all. But people have different incentives here. And it's a case of, if I'm going to be voting on every proposal, that's too high an engagement cost. I've got to be an expert. That's not realistically going to happen. So I will delegate it to someone. But now I can delegate it to profit. I don't really care which way the vote is going. Do I care which way the vote is going? I guess.
I mean, presumably in a meta way, you should care, because like, when a vote comes up and it's yes, no, or it's whatever, like every outcome of that vote is going to improve or not improve the protocol. And the debate is around which one does what. And so you should have an opinion on that. You should vote or delegate according to who you think will
vote in your
represent that
in
opinion.
who is aligned with you. But then it gets weird when you have a love price when they step in, they price them, they are pricing the market. So we get to my first point really
Yes.
here of alarm bells here is what 1% of the cost of the actual vote. Like that's kind of crazy. As you said, there's an asymmetry there that is massive. You can leverage and you can
Yep.
basically sway a vote in your direction, I guess, for what would be much cheaper than you having to do it in the market in the first place. Because the whole thing about, yes, you have this market, the market's supposed to be self-correcting when the assets in that market go up and down in price, and that affects you. But if you can
Yes,
undermine
and
that,
that's when those two parts aren't separable. Like
mm-hmm.
if the market is that your ownership and your voting rights are not economically separated that way, then that's what happens. In order
Yeah.
to purchase more voting power, I need to invest more in ownership of the token.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
Yeah.
not what happens when you delegate and sell.
Yeah, because when you
And
do
that's
that
what gives
delegation,
the space for that leverage.
you
Yeah.
basically decouple the two.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets interesting, because now you could basically say you're undermining the actual market here by doing this. There's another thing that they did here, and another reason why this particular story, because I'm pretty sure this probably happened in a lot of DAOs, because there are tons of governance structures out there. What made this one very interesting to me as well was the way that Lobbyfy decided to vote, because the proposal was for 3 people to join this board. Lobbyfy came up with a rationale, and by the way, they apparently assess and analyze every proposal that's put forward to them before they put it onto the market in terms of configuring how their vote is going to be interpreted and going to be executed on that against that proposal. In this case, 3 people were up for a vote. They decided that it's a winner takes all strategy for one person. So now what happens is they're undermining the proposal completely in my mind, because this is a proposal for 3 people. You're supposed to split your votes 3 ways. Instead, they just basically centralized it in some way and said, no, whoever gets all of these votes, or no, all of these votes are going to go to one person.
Yeah.
And for me, we work in tech and we've worked in IT departments. There's this concept of shadow IT. You have shadow governance as well, because basically what's happening here is, okay, it's almost like it's happening outside of the realm, outside the place of discussion. Lobbyfy is literally, it's a separate domain, separate platform. All the discussions are happening there, probably in a Discord channel that's specific for Lobbyfy, as opposed to where it's supposed to be open discourse and going back and forth here. So to me, it's also kind of set a bit of a dangerous precedent as well. And I think this was flagged as well, because again,
I mean, there's probably honestly like technical constraints on that decision making. You know, like their platform only allows you to purchase and vote. Like it seems like it kind of wants to have binary allocation of the delegation kind of thing.
That could be possible.
But I think it's a fair point. Like when I first learned about this, which we talked about in our notes or whatever, I assumed that this was a full on market. Like I put my votes up for delegation there, and then somebody bought my votes
and sets a price
at a market clearing level, and then that happened. But it's actually a little bit more intermediated than that. In that I delegate with Lobbyfy. Lobbyfy sets the price either via directly setting a price through the instant buy stuff or via an auction, and then gives me yield. So like, I assumed it was a market more like Polymarket or something, where there's a clearance price on the votes and that sort of happens, but it's not quite that. And that introduces space for the intermediator to introduce, either intentionally or unintentionally, to introduce its own interests in a way, or its own decisions, which could be self-interested or could not be.
And so and I kind of found that, I don't know, it definitely makes it an interesting podcast. This makes it an interesting topic as well. And so another reason why I found that this was interesting is because apparently DAOs are becoming more popular ways to purchase and hold assets, partially as an upshot of the fact that in the US, they basically created a legal mechanism to recognize DAOs as a separate going concern from the people who participate in them. So basically, like a limited liability company, if you set up
similar
business,
to a corporation, right?
Literally that. Legislation was passed in summer 2024 in Wyoming, but that basically, I think, sets a precedent in states federally as well. I'm not sure. Again, US listeners, you can set us straight on that one. But basically what it does is it basically limits the liability against. So if you're in a DAO and someone else does something wrong, you are not on the hook for what they did. So they are now becoming popular as a legal mechanism in which to buy businesses. So you're going to now see these governance mechanisms proliferate for certain reasons. Why? I can't think of. I'm not buying a business. I'm not selling a business. I don't think I would. In my instinct to engage, oh, I'm going to put that in a DAO. But as we see these gaining popularity, I think we're going to see more interesting circumstances arise, such as this Lobbyify one, like Michael said, the disintermediation or the realization that your token has two separate functions and that you can actually, even though they're supposed to be treated as one and the same in the way they behave in the market, someone's going to realize, okay, well, you can decouple the two and there is value to be found there. I also find it weird in that basically you could then, I don't know, maybe this is a bit too far-fetched, but now the profit-seeking motive of Lobbyify also kind of bleeds down to the stake owner as well, in that I now have these votes. I could have a bunch of tokens that have voting power on a bunch of different chains. And I'm like, well, actually, maybe this is the actual main business model. I just rent out my votes at a profit and do nothing at all. But then the problem you have with a lot of these chains is a lot of them, the way they work technically is they release tokens on a specific schedule. And so there's a certain amount of tokens that will be out by 2030, for example. As percentages of those as there's more tokens in circulation, the idea, I think it's to create a deflationary pressure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's dilution, I guess.
Yeah, it's dilution, right? Basically. I guess what's going to happen is you should have more people buy that token. But if you start to centralize the amount of tokens and then you're able to use this kind of leverage to persuade, what am I trying to think?
Yeah, I don't know. That's tokenomics, I guess.
Yeah, do you see the tokenomics of it? Basically, the tokenomics of this kind of give me the heebie-jeebies in that you're now basically saying, okay, well, you can just make money off just having the voting power and not actually using it yourself, but just renting it out to people at a profit. And then that forms, obviously, rent-seeking behavior, which we all know in late-stage capital economics is not a great thing right now, especially coming from the UK. We see that all the time. And doing that in governance is kind of weird. I don't think I have a real life parallel. You can't rent.
Yeah, I mean, like, all of these problems are things that corporate governance has, like, not dissimilar problems to corporate governance.
That's
right?
where I was going.
So, if I have a corporation, I have shareholders. Those shareholders have both ownership and voting rights.
Yeah.
Those two things are separable. Like share owners can delegate their voting rights.
Yeah.
And, there's a few solutions to this on the corporate governance side.
Yes.
But it has the same thing, right? Either people vote directly, their votes get kind of thrown on the ground because they don't vote, or it gets delegated.
Yeah.
And, or the other thing that happens is maybe I'm actually a passive investor. And this is kind of part that I think is interesting to think about its relationship with, because passive investors are supposed to not have some strong opinions on, individual governance things. And so, like, the solution there is, at least if you read enough of Matt Levine's column, which he talks about quite frequently, the solution there is that there's these things called proxy advice firms. It's like one's called like International Shareholder Solutions, or ISS, something like that. I forget exactly what the acronym is. But basically, the large passive investors like BlackRock, I don't know the names of them. All, those people, mutual funds, ETFs, not ETFs because that's a separate thing, but you know what I mean?
Yep.
Pay these proxy advice firms to tell them how to vote. And similar to, like you said, with Lobbyify, they evaluate everything that comes up and then they set a price. It's kind of similar. They evaluate every governance proposal that comes up across all these corporations, and then they give an advice for how the passive investors should vote. And then the passive investors vote according to that advice. And that's how they kind of outsource responsibility for, like, individually determining how to vote on governance, because individually determining how to vote on governments would, like, kind of be active investing, not passive investing. Anyway, okay, that's another solution. So, like, all these things corporate governance does, but I don't think, to my knowledge, that they, like, actively sell voting rights. I don't know if that's a legal reason, regulatory reason, if they actually do, but you know what I mean? Like, that aspect is not there as far as I know.
To circle back to my rambling point, exactly my point here, because when you brought in an example of corporate governance, one thing that shoots to mind is that corporations don't always float all of their shares as well, right? So that's one
Hmm.
of the defense mechanisms they have, where
True.
I don't think these DAOs use that defense mechanism because all of their tokens are in circulation until the next scheduled lock. So I guess in between that time of, okay, there's a proposal now and there's some coming up, you basically can leverage yourself to the hilt in order. It's basically easier to manipulate the vote outcome because all of the tokens are in. And you also don't have Class A, Class B shares and non-voting rights,
Yes,
etc.
which is, I mean,
Everything.
maybe I think you could design a governance
You
protocol
could,
that
and
does
this
have
is
different
what's
classes of
there,
shares.
and
But
that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, are we just going to end up mimicking real life structures in a digital form? Is that and so? This is where I struggle to see why. Again, I made that joke about why would I put anything into a DAO? I'm like, I don't. It's just another overhead. Yeah. So I guess I'm figuring out what the actual not the use case. In real time, I'm trying to figure out how would you how do you actually defend against this? This is
well,
kind
yeah,
of
and I think that's a question that the Arbitrum community brought up.
mhm,
How do you defend like it? Yeah, and I think do you want to ban this behavior? Do you want to
mhm,
try to interfere with this behavior? Is a
yeah,
question, and you can take yes, no to that question.
mhm,
And then if you want to try to interfere with this behavior, how do you do that?
yeah,
Presumably, you could keep like a block list of addresses that delegated votes are not counted for
yeah.
from, and you would try to put platforms that you
But then
think
that
are
becomes an arms race, right? Because then obviously
yeah,
people start to
exactly.
upskill themselves and so on. It's an interesting one, and it's one I don't have an answer to. I've just
Yeah, I mean, you could
realized.
not have delegation as
Mhm.
well. Like you could not implement delegation would maybe be another way, but
Yeah,
that also seems kind of bad because delegation has some
it has some
very
benefits in
useful
that
and
it helps.
legitimate points.
Yeah, it helps engagement. Otherwise, because everyone, because the problem with this direct democracy situation, which is why we don't have it very much in real life, is everyone now has to become an expert on the topic, number one, to inform themselves of what they're voting for.
Hmm.
Number two, you can have more than one proposal. So now it increases the overhead. So now you're constantly going back. You're going to get voter apathy and you're never going to get a quorum, i.e., enough people to actually meet a threshold where you can say this vote was legitimate. And then you can get the tyranny of the minority, I think they say in more articulate circles. So I can understand why delegation is a good idea and why it should happen. It's just in our real democracies, obviously, you delegate to 4 years, and 4 years is now a bit of a long cycle. But we won't go down there. Whereas here, it's a quick cycle, or it's per proposal. Yeah,
Yeah, you
it's an
can move in
interesting
and
one.
out of that. Yeah, I think. So there's a couple other things this reminds me of, some
Go
that
on.
we've talked about. One is like when we talked about UMA and Polymarket and all that,
Mm,
and the idea
mm.
that between different like layers of the stack that you're talking about, there's like economic leverage between those different layers that you can use. So like with the UMA stuff, it was like there's these Polymarket markets that are built on top of UMA, right? Like with UMA as the resolution
Mhm.
protocol.
Yeah.
There's Polymarket prediction markets built on top of that. Those prediction markets have billions of dollars wagered in them if it's like a super popular thing, like we were talking about the election markets.
Hmm.
Uh, but the protocol underneath that, like its raw market cap is less, and potentially even less than the amount that would be lost if one side lost that market that's built on top of that.
Yeah.
And so that's like a leverage opportunity, right? Um, so that's kind of interesting. Like and it feels similar here. Like there's the governance protocol underneath the actual DAO built on top. And there's that asymmetric leverage where, well, I can spend, 10K to get 6.5 million worth of voting power. That felt similar to the UMA thing where it's like,
Yeah.
well, if I can buy UMA coin for, however much and influence the resolution of the market, I can preserve maybe a greater amount of capital.
One
So
hundred
that
percent. Now that you say
that, that
that,
kind
it's
of like,
just yeah.
yeah, like kind of asymmetric
The
governance
asymmetric thing is a
attack,
weird.
you would call it, I think.
I think you would, and I think it comes back to good old-fashioned security principles, where we talk about when you have one thing talking to another, and there's a gap between what is assumed and what is actually real, you can exploit it, and that's what I think you're seeing here. Is markets exploit that gap? The whole point of markets is to exploit information asymmetry, but the problem is bad actors also exploit information asymmetry. This is not to say Lobbyfy are bad actors. I don't think they're bad actors. I think they're quite neutral in this case. I think
Mhm.
it's a bit crazy that they get to price the voting, and I think they need to be a bit more transparent, or should have been more transparent, or I don't know, a bit more considered in what the consequences of them pricing those votes so cheaply should have been. But they do actually write their own rationale for these proposals or how they propose these markets and publish it. I don't know if there's recourse. I mean, that's up to, I don't know. But yeah, I think you're right. That exploiting that gap, that asymmetrical gap, and creates
And
opportunities of
it's like
leverage.
it's not just like information asymmetry. It's like actual economic
Yeah,
asymmetry between the
yeah,
amount of value that's in a lower level protocol and the amount of value that's in the upper
yeah.
protocol built on top of it. Um, yeah, like there's other things that feels similar to, like I think there's a way in which it feels a little bit similar to the Mev stuff as well, in that there's a like a market capitalization of um it's not the same kind of gap, but it's kind of I don't know.
I
There's
think
something
I know
about
what you're
Mev
reaching
that
for.
like
It's
feels similar.
it's the commoditization of everything, right? And
Hmm.
this is that Mev was kind of the same thing. It was, let's create a market. It's not a bug, it's a feature. We'll just create a market out of it. I feel like there's a commoditization here of the delegation, the vote stuff that you talked
Yeah,
about
and
earlier.
I feel like the philosophical side is similar too. It's like, well, like should a market be made of that? Is kind of the question. I don't know if similar people would answer similarly to that question than to the Mev question. It probably depends on your incentives
I
and
genuinely do think it
where you
depends
are
on the
in the
incentives.
ecosystem.
And I
But
think now,
yeah.
I think that I haven't seen incentive alignment come up a little bit in the Twitter sphere around crypto. A bunch of random things are happening in crypto. I think someone said the same thing about this Cubic attack on Monero, actually, to do a callback, which is about incentives, because that's what we discussed last week. They didn't hack the network, they just paid everyone else and gave them an incentive to join them. That's how they've increased their hash rate so dramatically. It's the same thing here. I think what we need to do, we're at a level in the maturity cycle of decentralized networks where it's like, I think we need to think long and hard about the incentive structure going forward. That's not to say people didn't in the past,
Yep.
but I think the game has changed a bit now. So to use that colloquialism, and so now it's people are now identifying the incentive gaps and exploiting them in ways that nobody anticipated, and then you're having to go back and fix it afterwards. I think, yeah, I think a lot. I think going forward, and I'm starting. I'm going to definitely be proposing topics around this more, because I think there needs to be more conversation around what incentive alignment and how you do that in code in a trustless network, because I don't think it's been talked about enough, and I think we're starting to see more and more stories crop up. This Monero one, Lobbyfy, and so forth, and I think there's probably a couple others if I look back and look forward, that where we're going to see this crop up again. Okay, that's 42 minutes. So we don't want to keep you too long. Michael, is there any final points you want to make about this? That was a
Don't.
good podcast.
I don't think so.
All right, cool. Thank you for sticking with us, and we'll be back within the next 2 weeks with another topic.